Today we're watching AFRL's Inspire Rewind. I'm one of your hosts, Kenneth McNulty.
And I'm Michelle Miller. Kenneth and I normally host AFRL's Lab Life podcast, but today we're hosting AFRL Inspire Rewind from our homes due to a global pandemic and social distancing. Today we expected to be in sunny Florida near Eglin Air Force Base for the 5th installment of AFRL Inspire. Today, we would have heard from some amazing speakers giving TEDx-style talks about the work they do for the Air Force. But instead, we're from our home, taking a look back at some really relevant talks today from past Inspire years. And we'll have some special guests in the present day talking about what they're doing now to help the Air Force and our nation in the midst of a global pandemic. Thanks for joining us.
And speaking of guests, we have two other familiar voices from our Lab Life podcast here to speak with you about how Inspire started. Today we are joined by Dr. Dan Berrigan and Dr. Carrie Ann Hobbs, some of the original people who helped start Inspire back in 2015. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Kenneth. Glad to be here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. I'm excited for this new version of Inspire when it eventually comes out.
Yeah, Carrie, I have to say your background's a lot cooler than Dan's. Probably the coolest background we're gonna have here. I've got like a green screen behind me, but that's really neat.
Thank you.
Cool. And we wanted to ask you guys, you started, at the roots of Inspire with ideas and getting the original speakers back, 5 years ago. What really is Inspire?
Well, the AFRL Inspire started is we needed a new way to do training for AFRL. We were in this meeting for how do you do training? There's a lot of these ideas about new types of training or having new ways to organize it. And we were talking about the best ways or some of the best trainings we've ever been to. They end up pulling in a lot of TED Talks. And I think there's a lot of value there in learning how to share our message in a way and share kind of what we did and deeper than just the technology, but also the people's stories behind it. How do some of these programs at AFRL happen, what they are, the challenges that people face. And that really kind of helps other people in the lab to see, hey, when I'm really struggling with this, there's a path forward. There's other people who've done these very challenging programs. They've hit different hard rocks, but it's worth it because you can see the successes that come out after all of this hard work.
And it was important to us too that the stories were told in a fashion that were different from the typical technical, presentations that were kind of as scientists and engineers trained to do. That we wanted to, do it in a format that anybody could. It's very approachable to anyone.
And it's very hard to do. And we tried to think about how do we even set this up and train the different speakers to be able to give this kind of talk, because we're so ingrained in some of the technical talks that we give and the style that you see at a conference. And whenever the speakers initially came, a lot of them kind of had that mindset. We're going to give another conference presentation. So to do this, Dan and I actually reached out to our local TEDx Dayton organizers, and we had speakers coaches come in and work with the speakers. And so it's not just that we pulled somebody out of the lab and they were able to give this talk. They put so much work into it. So we usually had them come in for the first talk. They gave their run of it, and then they got completely torn apart by the speakers, by other people in the room, to say, okay, this doesn't make sense, or you're making a lot of assumptions here about what your audience knows. And even Dan and I, as doctors, we have this technical background, but if Dan's talking about what he's doing for research, I'm not going to understand the material science stuff, and vice versa. I think we both kind of will go off the deep end sometimes, and it's a struggle. So we wanted to make sure it was something that an educated but diverse audience could understand. And so the TEDx speaker coaches work with them for months beforehand. And we learned from the first year, so that the second year we did a combination of individual coaching sessions with each of the speakers, as well as group coaching sessions, and so that they could actually see the feedback that other people were getting. And then we also have this camaraderie within the group. that people could kind of grow as a group as they're going through this process, because it is a very difficult process, because you get emotionally attached to what you have written, and it's your story. It's this program that you've worked on for so long, and somebody else is criticizing how you want to tell it. But in the end, you end up with this really concise, really cool, just quick explanation. And by quick, like, if, you know, even a conference presentation a lot of times is 30 minutes, and we're asking them to give a 10-minute presentation to a lay audience, which is way harder than it sounds. So to get to that process, it's immensely challenging, and the speakers put in a ton of work. And it was very cool to see that process.
Yeah,
So
you can really, you can really
My
see
apologies.
like the progress too, that the ultimate product is amazing. I was just wondering what some of your favorite talks are.
I mean, for me, you know, I have a lot of, like, it's really hard to choose, and I know that's kind of a cop out. But you know, I've said anywhere from, you know, at different times I've thought Jeff Calcaterra's or Rufus's talk about auto GCAS, or you know, the talks about audio, you know, monitoring, and but like one of the ones that's very different that also comes to mind is Major Patrick Madimby's talk from a couple of years ago. Tells this great immigrant story and working his way up and going into the Air Force, and the Air Force being a platform for him to grow personally and make something of himself and be really successful in a really admirable human being and airman, really inspirational at that level. So so for me, it all depends on the day of the week, but you know, he's somebody's story who stuck with me.
Yeah, I'm very partial to the Auto GCAS story too, because I had an opportunity to work very briefly on the Auto GCAS program, and it has inspired a lot of my research since. And I was able to, being part of that program, work with these engineers that have been working on the technology for 30 years. And then we were in this really cool cross period where it actually had gone out into the field, and to have a pilot come back and tell us from the pilot's perspective how this is changing for them. That really speaks to what we do as the lab, is that we're working on technologies for decades that end up making life-saving changes, make the difference between life and death, that the technologies that the airmen need, that the soldiers and the troops need out there. So that was really a really cool one. One of my other favorites, and one that I posted to my own Facebook again recently with the coronavirus pandemic, is Dr. Starr's presentation on pandemics and how they spread. And there's this one scene in there, she talks about, she is referring back to a movie, talking about, you know, you see the bats, and then you see all the different animals and this whole chain before a chef then goes and prepares this pig, and then wipes their hands to end up going out and meeting patient zero. And it's kind of the similar process to how some of our other viruses like SARS and the current coronavirus started. And making that real. It's interesting too, and it's eerie to go back now and see that talk and see how much of it is a reality right now. So it's just kind of, it's interesting how much of even what we do as the Air Force impacts people's lives around the world.
It's huge, and these Inspire talks really show that. We're actually going to end up transitioning to show Dr. Clarice Starr's talk from 2017. It's called Breaking the Biological Kill Chain, and Dr. Starr is a deputy division chief in our applied technology and genomics division, and she's got a lot of perspective that she gave 3 years ago, but then we're even going to get to talk to her later in this presentation about what she's feeling right now, which I'm really excited about hearing. So glad that was one of your favorites. So Dan and Carrie Ann, thanks for joining us to kick off AFRL Rewind, or AFRL Inspire Rewind. Thanks.
Thank you, Michelle. Thanks, Kenneth.
Yep, thank you.
Hello, welcome. So who loves movies? Raise your hand. I love movies. I love dramas and comedies and thrillers, but there's one kind of movie I absolutely do not love, and that is virus Armageddon movies. You know these movies. It's when a virus basically comes and kills us all dead, right? And the reason I don't love these movies is because one or two things happen. One, we all turn into zombies, brains, right? Or two, they try to be accurate, but they're so not accurate. They're not. I mean, they try to make a vaccine in 24 hours, or the epidemiologist lives. And everyone knows, the epidemiologist would be one of the first to go. That's why I became a microbiologist, just saying. So in the year 2011, another one of these movies came out. It was called Contagion. Anyone see that one? And so I got dragged to this movie, kicking and screaming, and I bought a big old thing of popcorn, and I was going to throw it at the screen every time I saw something inaccurate, right? But this movie was different. This movie reminded me of a lot of the drills we were doing in the lab in case a virus hit the fan. A lot of people died in this movie, and there wasn't a quick cure. And the epidemiologist, she didn't make it. But the thing that got me about this movie was the last, say, minute and a half of it. And if you've never have seen it, it basically shows you how patient zero got the virus. And it's a really simple scene. You basically see a bulldozer come and knock over a banana tree, and a bunch of birds fly away. And then you see a bat come and eat the banana. And then it flies to a pig pen. And then you see a man buying a pig for his restaurant. And then you see the chef preparing the pig, wipes his dirty hands on his apron, and goes and poses for a picture with patient zero. So what did this scene show us, other than wash your hands, people, you need to wash your hands? Bird and or bat plus pig plus human is bad juju. It's a recipe for disaster. This is Virology 101. If a virus can hop from all those critters, a new virus can infect a human. And new viruses are never good. And in 2009, that very combination came to the United States. The Department of Defense has a global influenza surveillance program. The Army, the Navy, and the Air Force screen flu worldwide because our military are deployed worldwide. And in April of 2009, the Air Force flu team was meeting with the Navy flu team in San Diego. And a conversation came up about a non-subtypable flu A. So what's that? When you're doing flu surveillance, you're looking for a lot of things, but a couple things. One, is it flu A or B? And two, what do the proteins on the outside of it look like? And they look at hemagglutinin and neuraminidase. So that's where you get the H1, H2, N3, N4. So when a virus significantly mutates in the flu virus, it's hard to subtype it. And that's a red flag that it could be new. And new viruses are never good. So after the teams talked, they realized that, hey, this is probably real. So the Air Force team flew back to San Antonio to Brooks, picked up the phone, and thus began the 2009 H1N1 swine flu pandemic that y'all are very familiar with. This was a triple reassortment. Bird plus pig plus human got together, had a big old party, and a brand new virus came out. So what happens when you're the first to report a brand new flu? You win a prize called mass pandemonium. So the CDC flew from Atlanta to San Antonio to pick up the virus in their own plane. They had their own plane. Who knew they had their own plane? More meetings with more brass than you ever imagined happened. Everyone in the Metro DC area had our lab director's phone number in their BlackBerry. But the testing. So this was cedar fever season in Texas. Everyone had a sore throat and everyone had a fever. If you had a fever and a sore throat at Lackland, our training facility for the Air Force, you got swabbed and quarantined until your flu test came back. So a laboratory that was getting about 100 respiratory samples a day, we're getting 1,200 respiratory samples a day. So basically 24/7 testing operations had to happen, and more people had to come in to help with the backlog. and it was chaos, and it took months to get over. Fortunately, for all of us, this was considered a near miss, a close call. Why? Because it was no more deadly than seasonal flu. But it could have been worse. It could have been so much worse. Microbial pathogens are shortening the kill chain. We have bacteria that are becoming more and more resistant to every antibiotic known to man. We have a virus that has mutated to be in a body long enough from someone to take a plane from Liberia all the way to Dallas, Texas, without showing any symptoms. And we saw that during the Ebola outbreak. Viruses are mutating just enough where traditional testing can't pick them up. And so people get infected and it spreads before we even know what's going on. So after the pandemic, in that fall, I was at a conference with my friend and colleague, Dr. Jim Baldwin. And over dinner that night, over beer, or 3, Dr. Baldwin and I had a conversation, and it went something like this. Jim, we have to get better about doing biosurveillance. I mean, what if everyone started dropping dead, Jim? What are we going to do? I mean, what if it wasn't flu? Because at the time, we were only looking for flu. Well, Clarice, we need to start looking for things we don't know instead of things we know. This is a very Jim answer, just saying. Okay, Jim, how would we do that? So it's easy. We'll do next generation sequencing. Okay, and he pulled out a napkin and he proceeded to write down something that would fundamentally change our research program. When you're sick and you go to the doctor has to tell the lab what to look for. Look for flu, look for strep, look for an STD. So what happens if the test comes back negative? We look for what we know. That's how we do traditional testing. We look for what we know, not what we don't know. Wouldn't it be great to submit a sample and the lab will tell you what's in it? You have to have no need for foreknowledge. So what Jim did on that napkin was design a way that we could chop up all the genetic information in a sample, put barcodes on it, and run it through a data analysis metric that could tell us what was definitively in the sample. No need for guessing, it just tells us. It was really a clever idea. It was a little bit insane, let's be honest, and expensive, let's be honest again. Do you know how much genetic information is in a patient sample? Do you know? We were talking about movies earlier. How many of you have seen The Matrix? Do you remember that scene where there's a bunch of ones and zeros coming down, right? Imagine screens like that with A's, T's, C's, and G's, all genetic information. So how do you make that make sense? And how do you do it where it doesn't cost $1,000 or more a sample? So Jim said, I have an idea. I have an idea how we can deal with the data and it won't cost as much. And so we went down that path. And not only in this path did we have to learn programming and bioinformatics 101, we had to deal with gigabytes worth of data. We had to change the Air Force dogma on how to handle biological big data. And that in itself was more challenging than the science. So something happened in the tech world as we were doing this. Serendipity, we call it. A lot of companies were getting into the next generation sequencing gig, and they were challenging each other to make smaller, faster, cheaper sequencers to bring the cost down so everyone could use this technology. And to put this in perspective, in the year 2000, it cost $100 million to sequence a human genome. In the year 2013, any guesses how much it cost? There wasn't numbers out there. Not that cheap. $3,000. $3,000. We went from $100 million to $3,000 in 13 years. That is an unprecedented pace for technology to come down in price, way surpassing Moore's Law. So how have we, in our lab, used this technology to dismantle the biological kill chain? We're doing it in 3 steps. All right. Step 1, quickly identify what is in the environment before people become sick. Biosurveillance. We have completely improved our biosurveillance platform. We look for everything and everything, not just flu and nasal wash samples. We look for viruses in mosquitoes. We look for viruses in the gut. We look for viruses in everything. We take those samples where people are really sick and everything has come out negative, and we take a deeper dive in it. We also take samples from our partner labs overseas because a lot of these viruses pop up overseas. So we have become virus hunters. Joking. In 2009, this was unheard of. No one was doing this. Very few labs were because it was expensive. But now, in 2017, there's a few Department of Defense laboratories especially that utilize this technology for their biosurveillance program. And by doing so, we have learned so much about the microbial world around us. Step 2, learn how to get the right information to the right people. This technology produces gobs of information. Gobs of information. So, but it's really cool. It really is so cool. So, I can tell you what a tick last fed on. Was it a bird? Was it a plane? No, I'm just kidding. Superman. So, I can also tell you if you brush or floss your teeth based on the bacteria in your blood. I'm on to you. Do you think my commander cares of whether or not you brush or floss your teeth? Sir, do you care? Absolutely. Wrong answer, sir. So, sure he cares, but during an outbreak, probably not so much. Okay, I should have coached him better, just saying. Anyway, just joking. This technology offers a lot of information for virologists or for microbiologists. It can tell you where a virus came from, how it's mutating, where it's mutating, if it's susceptible for therapeutics, or if it's bioengineered. That's a thing now. People are pasting viruses together, like life wasn't scary enough. But we can take that data and put it into usable data that a commander could use, who basically wants to know, what is it? Do my people have it? Do I have to quarantine? How long will I be down? It's the best of both worlds. We can get all this information and then translate it to usable data. Step 3, would you like a therapeutic for that? Yeah, good man there, yes. So you find a brand new virus, now what? Do you wait for the CDC to go through the vaccine process, which is an arduous process that may or may not work? The ZMapp, the experimental Ebola therapeutic, took weeks to grow in tobacco plants and produced milliliters of solution. If you know a virus's genetic code, you can make a therapeutic for that. How? Programmable biomatter. The use of synthetic biology or simple DNA to change and hijack your cell machinery to go after the virus, buying precious time for the vaccine process to work. This isn't science fiction anymore. This is science fact. We are preparing ourselves for the worst. We're trying to get ready for that horrible contagion situation where millions of people are dying. And it's not just for our airmen, it's for everyone. And this is our new frontier. So, starting a program from a napkin is not easy. It's downright impossible, and especially in places where very forward thinkers are employed. But some of those best ideas come from outside of the box thinking, right? It was Henry Ford who said that if I asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. And sometimes we are employed at places where we're encouraged to go after the faster horse and not the innovation of an automobile because it's easier. Regular pathogen detection was easy. Anyone could do it. Well, pretty much everyone could do it. Trying to use a new technology to use a genetic code to track it, to trace it, to make a therapeutic for it, that was hard. That was really hard. But it was Elon Musk who said that if it's important enough, you keep doing that, even if the odds are stacked against you. And there were some serious odds stacked against us. You do it because it's important. We needed an upgrade from the way that we did traditional testing. Bio is the new nuclear. And we needed to be on track on that, for that challenge. And to get a handle of the biological kill chain. So a lot of you are from industry, tech, and you have different stories about people saying how hard it is to try to do new, innovative things. And I'm here to tell you, keep at it. Keep doing it. It's important. Even if you get $1.85 in funding, keep doing it. And I'm encouraging leaders to fund your scientists, fund their vision. I promise you, the results can be amazing. I'm a testament to that. Thank you.
Okay, listeners, we just heard from Dr. Clarice Starr on the previous talk, and now we have Dr. Starr with us virtually. Dr. Starr, welcome to this special edition of AFRL Inspire, AFRL Inspire Rewind. So, having just listened to your talk, you're talking about pandemics 3 years ago. So you've been worrying about this for a long time, and now I'm re-listening to this sitting from my home in the midst of a pandemic. Is there anything that you would tell our listeners right now? What are you thinking? What are you feeling?
Yeah, definitely. I would love to tell you that sitting here almost 3 years after I gave that talk, that I am totally shocked and surprised that we are here, but I'm not. So that's because for many years, public health people have been walking around a little bit like the fortune teller from Julius Caesar. The Ides of March are coming. The Ides of March are coming. We also sound a little bit like Chicken Little, like the sky is falling. And this talk that I gave was a little bit more of an example of that. I will tell you that I am surprised that we are at the state we are as far as the lockdowns and the total death counts, even with the lockdowns, because in all the planning of pandemic response, we are in the worst case scenario, and that's what we're working on right now. We're fighting a war that ends up being with an invisible stealth adversary who is lethal in some cases, and in others just very, very, very good at disrupting mission and life. This is both in the military and the civilian world, and you're seeing that now. You end up having to make these risk assessments about human life, and they're not pleasant, and it's very unpleasant. And it's one of the reasons we try so hard for it not to get to this state, and why people like me and my team exist to fight it. So in the talk, I had a lot of thoughts. It's been a long time since I've seen it. I mentioned my love of movies, and I was thinking about this the other day when you brought this up to me about talking about this topic. I want to tell you about my all-time favorite movie is Apollo 13, partly because I'm a space and NASA buff. But what I love the most about this movie is that in a moment of absolute crisis, you have all these scientists who are gathered together to work to solve a problem to successfully help people home. And it's very motivational. So Gene Kranz, who is the director of the Apollo 13 mission, and you hear it in this moment of complete chaos after the explosion happened. You can hear his recording, and he says, okay, now let's everyone be cool. Let's solve the problem, and let's not make it any worse by guessing. And when this pandemic response started, a lot of us had to take that as our mantra because it was chaos, and led us to work collectively as a unified public health to bring answers to people who desperately needed it. And as a side note, my boss has another quote from Gene Kranz on a sign in his office, and it's the famous one that says failure is not an option. And he actually put that on his door when this all started. And it's an important reminder because we have a lot of people who are depending on us for help. Gene Kranz also in that movie ask, what do we have on the spacecraft that's good? And he does that during an especially crazy moment of utter helplessness. And in this pandemic, we have some good. The technology that I mentioned in the Inspire talk, the next generation sequencing, has given us so much information about this virus, its origins, not man-made, the travel it took from China to Italy, or to Europe, to New York, and it has shown us the potential strains of the super spreaders, and the strains that may cause very serious illness and the ones that may be a little mild, attributing to the mild deaths. Mild illnesses. We're getting information near daily with the great minds who are using this technology, and we are learning so much about the virus. And so the more you know about your enemy, the more you're going to be able to find a weakness, and you're going to be able to defeat it. So I will tell you that if I could have a talk with my future self after the dust settles from this pandemic, we're going to have a lot of hot washes, I'm sure, but I will say fundamentally our battle call needs to change. We are using the exact same technology for clinical testing for this virus that we used back in the 2009 H1N1 pandemic. And this is akin to that Henry Ford quote I mentioned in the talk. If I asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses instead of a car. And we have some really fast horses for pathogen detection, record fast, but all still come with the pitfalls of the existing technology. And you're seeing that in the news. And that's why we have the antibody test issues. And that's why we're having issues with getting so many tests out to people. We desperately, desperately need an automobile in this phase here. If we cannot reliably and massively test to see who has it or who has had it, our risk is greater. So we need that data to reduce the risk and to get on with our daily lives. So, this pandemic has been compared to the Spanish flu of 1918. And in some ways, it is, because it's a brand new virus and a brand new population. And with that comes a certain amount of death and destruction. But I have faith in our scientists and our lab people who are working 24-hour shifts to test, and the healthcare workers who are on the front lines trying to save those who have been affected. We will not let this get to the numbers of the 1918 Spanish flu. You got to have faith in us, and stay home if you can. Cover your face and wash your hands. We're going to get through this.
Dr. Starr, thank you so much. That's
You're welcome.
A great message to hear right now. We do have faith in you. I know I've in your team. I often think, that there's people, the organization I work in that are working to keep, America safe and make us safer. Thanks for sharing your thoughts right now at this crazy time and taking time out of your day. I know you've got to go back to the lab, so we really appreciate you coming home to do this interview with us.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Stay safe.
Now we're going to speak to Dr. Wendy Goodson of our Materials and Manufacturing Directorate and her talk titled How to Cook an Aircraft. We'll be speaking with Dr. Goodson after, so please sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
Anthrax, black mold, Ebola, swine flu, avian flu, cholera, the plague. All these are pretty scary words in our vocabulary, and it's one thing when they're hitting people abroad. It's an entirely different thing when they hit us here at home. A perfect example of this is the Ebola outbreak from 2 summers ago. As you remember how that went down, there were thousands and thousands of people dying from Ebola in Africa. But things got really scary when passengers started showing up in airports that had been infected with Ebola. And so at that point, we knew that this thing could go global. And sure enough, it did. Not only was it at Gatwick in the UK, but it came right here to America. Cleveland, Ohio, there was a Frontier Airlines flight that passed through with an Ebola-infected passenger on board. And if you remember what happened next, basically the country freaked out, right? We had people in front of the White House with signs. We had people petitioning Congress. We had Congress talking to other congressmen saying, stop the flights, close our borders, let's keep this stuff out of our country. Well, the fact of the matter is, we can't do that as an Air Force. We have a job to do. We can't stop flying, and we can't close our borders. Because we're the people that are going into these places to pick up these infected patients and bringing them back home to the US for treatment. And we're the people that are sending our medics into harm's way in order to help with treating people wherever they're infected in the world. And so, no, it's not an option. We got a job to do. So what do you do? What do you do when you have someone who has contaminated the inside of your aircraft? Maybe they got Ebola, maybe they're part of a team that's been deployed and they've been hit with anthrax and you've got to get them home again, and now you've got a contaminated aircraft. Or maybe you have an aircraft that's sitting somewhere on a forward operating base and it gets hit with an anthrax cloud. How do you make sure that you can bring that asset home and bring the people home safely? So the options weren't numerous. One of the things you don't use is bleach. Bleach is a great disinfectant. It's great in your house. It's great in hospitals, but it's really a terrible thing for aircraft because it causes corrosion. It's an oxidant, and it just kicks off all kinds of corrosive reactions in your aircraft. So if you're going to go ahead and treat your aircraft to disinfect it with bleach, you might as well just leave that $87 million piece of equipment where it was contaminated, because it's going to be a useless hunk of metal pretty soon anyway. So what are the other options? Well, in 2008, the state of the art was to do the following. It was to let the aircraft stand out in the sun and have the UV rays bake the microbiology off of the aircraft. And then you would take off and fly it around real fast and air wash it. So let the wind and the rain and whatever else blow the microbiology off the aircraft. And then you would land wherever you were going and wash it down with hot and soapy water. So really not the best state of affairs here, right? It doesn't work all that great. For one thing, it doesn't decontaminate the inside of your aircraft. For another thing, if you get down to the third step and you're washing your aircraft down with hot and soapy water, guess what? Aircraft leak when they're sitting on the runway. And so now you've got hot and soapy water and anthrax leaking down into your aircraft, and you've contaminated the inside of your aircraft. So really, we needed a different solution. So what are our options, right? What kinds of technology is available to us? Well, it's right in your kitchen, actually. So you may be thinking about Thanksgiving coming around right around the corner. How do you ensure that the people that you're inviting to Thanksgiving dinner don't get contaminated by that turkey that you're cooking, right? So how do you ensure that you're not going to give food poisoning to everybody? Well, basically, we all know you stick that turkey in the oven, you put that oven at a certain temperature for a certain amount of time, and you're guaranteed to have decontaminated your turkey. Similarly, maybe you've had a baby in your house and you've had a baby bottle sterilizer. So a baby bottle sterilizer is basically this plastic dome, and you stick the baby bottles in the dome, and then you put some water in there, and you put the lid back on top, and you stick it in your microwave, and you nuke it. And that steam, that humidity that's generated inside of that is really good at sterilizing those baby bottles. So you're getting the picture, right? Heat, humidity, kind of, an autoclave kind of technology. Well, how do you do that for an aircraft, right? I mean, that's a pretty... hang on. Excuse me, hang on a second. Wendy Goodson, Soft Matter Materials. I'm kind of busy right now. Can I get back to you? Okay, yeah, I'm sorry, what did you say your name was? Bill Greer of the Human Effectiveness Directorate. What can I do for you, Bill? Yeah, my lab works on microbial contamination of materials. We look at biofouling, biocorrosion, that kind of thing. It's kind of like the biofilms that you got growing on your teeth, but it's infecting aircraft materials, not your teeth. Yeah. I'm sorry, what did you say? You have a whole aircraft decontamination system? That's kind of crazy. How does that work? 170 degrees Fahrenheit, 90% relative humidity for 72 hours. Okay, that's pretty crazy. What can I do for you? Oh, I see. So you're wondering whether or not the type of microbiology that my lab is interested in would be affected by the same process. I really have no idea what the answer is to that question, but I can look into it and get back to you. Okay, thanks. So that phone call changed my life. Changed the life of everybody in my lab. Because what Bill Greer, who I'd never met before, was asking me was, he was telling me that RH had built this aircraft decontamination system, and it was specifically designed for anthrax. And Bill Greer was about to demonstrate this technology down at Orlando International Airport. And he was thinking, we are about to cook an airplane. What else can we learn when we cook this airplane? What else might this technology be good for? And so he called me up out of the blue, and I didn't know the answer to that question. And I looked it up in the literature, and there was almost no literature available on it at all. And so I didn't really know what to do, but I thought about it a little bit, and I thought, you know what? One thing I did know was my lab had the ability to ask that question. It had the ability to go out into the field and assess the microbiology on an aircraft pre versus post decontamination. And that was something that we could bring to the table. So I called Bill back and I said, I'm in. And next thing we knew, our team was headed down to Orlando, and we were swabbing that aircraft tip to tail. So we were basically taking big giant Q-tips and we were wiping them over the surfaces, plating them on Petri plates, just like in Biology 101, Also doing some fancy DNA techniques to find out what types of microbiology were there and how many were there. And we were doing this as the aircraft structure arose around us. So this structure was made of structural insulation panels, which are basically two pieces of aluminum with styrofoam in between those pieces of aluminum. It's a highly modular system that can be built anywhere in the world. And if you just bring along your heaters, you can decontaminate any aircraft anywhere in the world with this system. So we went ahead and swabbed the whole aircraft and then went out to dinner. And I remember being really, really nervous over that dinner because I really had no idea what we'd gotten ourselves into. I didn't know what was going to happen. I remember sitting across from a colleague and saying, this is either going to be the stupidest thing that I've ever done in my career, or it's going to be one of the coolest. And I wouldn't be standing up here in front of you today if it wasn't one of the coolest. So we found all kinds of microbiology on that aircraft pre-decon. We had human pathogens and animal pathogens and plant pathogens and agents that cause corrosion. And after the decon, they were all gone. For all intents and purposes, that plane was sterile. And so think about the power of that, the power of asking that question for what else this decon system could do. Because not only did we know now that it worked for anthrax, but all these other things that could be on your aircraft. And that really mattered because 6 months later, I got another call. And this time it was the C-130 System Program Office. And they said, we have mold all over one of our aircraft. And we don't want to send our maintainers in there, and we don't want our crew on there, because it's everywhere. People have allergies. Nobody wants to be on the aircraft. What do we do? And I was able to say, we've got a solution for you. And sure enough, we took that same system, hooked it up to an aircraft from Peterson, and we cooked that aircraft too, and took care of their mold problem. And since then, some of this technology has also been transferred to the Navy. They have a lab over there that runs tests on some of the nastiest viruses in the world. And so pretty soon we'll know, too, how good this technology is good for those kinds of things, too. And the company that we worked with that built the original aircraft structure is dreaming a bigger dream, and that is of a facility where you can simultaneously treat an aircraft and treat people, so that the next time this happens, the next time we have an aircraft flying around the world with contaminated people on board, we can land it, treat the people, treat the aircraft, and not have them interacting with the rest of the United States, and avoid the freak-out mode that we had during the last Ebola outbreak. So I was tremendously honored, and it was very gratifying to be part of this team. It wasn't my idea. We just came along for the ride. And it made us all feel, myself and our team, like we were part of something bigger than ourselves. And one of the things that I wanted to pass along to all of you guys today, something really simple, and that is pick up the phone, AFRL. I mean, seriously, the talent in this room and the innovation, the creativity, the subject matter expertise is amazing across AFRL. And embrace the fact that you are part of something bigger than yourself and that you're part of this bigger mission. And it's a tremendously fun thing to be a part of. Every one of you may not feel like a hero on any particular day. You may feel like you're slogging through Petri plates or chemical reactions or spreadsheets or whatever it is, but I assure you, each and every one of you is a national asset. You're a part of the fabric of the Department of Defense, and you're part of what makes this country great. Thank you.
We're joined with Dr. Wendy Goodson, a senior biological scientist in our Materials and Manufacturing Directorate. Welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be back.
So the people want to know, we just watched your talk and they want to see where's cooking an aircraft at now during the current pandemic?
So we have been looking at using JBADS technology, or as we call JBADS light technology, in order to decontaminate aircraft for the current virus and the current pandemic. Fortunately, with all of the work that we've done in the background over a number of years, we know that that system is compatible with aircraft decontamination, and that we know it's not going to hurt the aircraft, and we know it's not going to hurt the materials on the aircraft. And we know that, we basically know how to implement the system. The big challenge right now is determining whether or not or how long you have to cook the aircraft in order to get it decontaminated or disinfected to the levels that you want it to get to. And so currently there is testing ongoing to determine how long and at what temperatures you might need to cook a system in order to get it where you want it to get it.
Well, it's great to hear our teams are actively working on the issue and solving it, especially in terms of the DoD and transferring aircraft. And is this, again, just in the DoD space, or has there been any talk beyond that to help with the crisis?
It's really interesting, actually. We've been talking with a lot of the folks who work with commercial aircraft. And of course, even in the SPOs, we have particular systems that go back and forth between commercial versions of the aircraft and military versions of the aircraft. And it seems like in many cases, the commercial systems are marching forward with technologies that we're not necessarily recommending. So there are some, you can use things like some ionization or UV or other technologies that they seem to be comfortable with that we're not comfortable with. So really the heat and humidity type of decontamination is something that is being mostly pursued by the military right now.
And something you mentioned to us beforehand when we're kind of talking, you said that it takes a team to really make this happen. So how has your team been operating and really making sure to execute this mission?
Well, so when this pandemic first started breaking out, I knew from previous experience in other things that had arisen over the last couple of years, Ebola and Zika, that the phone was going to start ringing, because there are a few members of us at AFRL who every time this kind of stuff comes up, we start getting questions about it. And so we started talking pretty early on. And what was interesting is that at that time, so there are methods already known for decontaminating aircraft that are mostly spray disinfectants and that kind of thing. And so a lot of the questions that were coming in were things like, oh, the CDC recommends, X, Y, or Z spray disinfectant. Can we use that on our aircraft? And so we initially started and still continue to respond and answer many of those questions about just disinfectants that are compatible with aircraft. But we brought the JBADS back into the conversation as we were talking to them about this, because we still have the problems that we did when I talked about it a few years ago, that those spray disinfectants aren't good for nooks and crannies that you might find all over your aircraft. And in some cases, some commands want to be able to say unload patients from an aircraft and turn that aircraft back around in a matter of hours. And if you have a really large aircraft, it can take several hours to go around with a spray and a wipe and everything else. And so we started to talk to them again about JBADS, and fortunately, because of the work that we had done before, we had worked with many of them. And so it wasn't like you were talking to somebody brand new out of the blue. They were familiar with the technology. And so we started to come up with a good plan for moving forward for testing it against this particular virus.
And is the goal then, or at least where you've been headed, is to have the means to build this area to cook the aircraft? You showed how modular it was in your talk. Any Air Force base, or is this something that your team is traveling with to help out?
So there are systems being developed, and there's already a program that's been going on even that was started after my Inspire talk, to have these mobile systems, and they will be ready by the summertime. But actually, we're talking about a different version of the system now, which is called JBADS Lite, which doesn't involve the humidity part of it. And it would allow any depot across the Air Force to be able to use their heating units that they all have within their hangars and hook them up to an aircraft, and to be able to decontaminate their own space in however long that we determine that that's required. So that's what we're calling JBADS Lite. It's just using heat in order to do this decontamination. One of the challenges there is regulating the amount of heat that the aircraft sees, and it's, you know, it can't be too hot, and it because you'll get damages to the structure, but it needs to be hot enough that you're going to achieve the decon. And so there, you know, there's some parameters that need to be determined, and in some cases on a case-by-case basis.
Well, it's amazing how agile the system is becoming. And like you said, this summer, I mean, that's very soon. So I'm glad to hear the evolution is taking such quick and big strides.
Yeah, it's really cool. And I will say that, you know, none of that would be possible without a partnership that we have going with the Navy. So when we initially did some of the JBADS testing, there was a scientist from the Navy named Tony Burr who was involved in helping with that. And he's been doing viral testing over the last couple of years. And so when this outbreak came out, we turned to him and said, you know, what do you know so far? And so he has been helping too to shape how we do that testing. And they are running tests in his lab already to be able to define those parameters in the laboratory. Then they're going to do that in the field, and then there's hope that we can roll it out again to these JBADS Lite type of systems.
Well, that's great to see almost this joint enterprise working together to really make sure this mission can be executed. A very inspirational message for people watching. So do you have any final messages or anything you want to get out to the people who may still be worried about the pandemic, knowing what you know?
I guess, you know, one thing that this whole thing has shown me is just the value of science, the value of research, and a long thread of continuing research and expertise that can contribute to solving the problem. Not only with this particular method that we've developed, but, you know, because we have the expertise to think about all that would be necessary in a case of aircraft decontamination or an office decontamination or whatever. You know, we have experts that can think about the microbiology, and they know how to think about the disinfectant properties, and they know how to think about the materials, and you kind of mold that all together. And even if it's, you know, an idea that some company has out of the blue, we are in a position that we can evaluate those as well as our own technologies now. And so I'm just very inspired by all the folks on our team that are working with us, and just how people have rallied around to lend whatever, you know, knowledge that they have, and the ability to analyze these systems that they have. It's really super cool.
That is absolutely inspiring and wonderful. Thank you so much for meeting with us to talk today and to speak on the technology.
Thanks a lot. Stay safe.
You as well.
Thanks.
Hi, everyone. Now we're here with Dr. Heather Marshall. Dr. Marshall is our Chief Learning Officer at AFRL, and she's really been involved in the 2019 and what would have been the 2020 AFRL Inspire talks. Dr. Marshall, welcome.
Hi, Michelle.
Yeah. So, you know, we've just watched a couple great Inspire talks that are really relevant to the time we're in right now. What are you feeling? What does AFRL Inspire mean to you?
Wow, that's a big question, Michelle. I think AFRL Inspire means a lot to me personally. First, I want to say you introduced me as being highly involved in last year and this year's process of picking speakers, but I have to say that was a major team effort. And I think that one thing that comes to mind for me right away AFRL Inspire is, wow, I am part of such an amazing, collaborative, smart organization that I feel super proud to be associated with it at any level. So I wanted to quickly say that the team this year, we thought we would be in sunny, beautiful Florida, and the team at Eglin Air Force Base had put together a tremendous program for us, and right now we have it on hold. So this was a time when you and I and Kenneth talked about, hey, let's do some reflection and look back on some of the amazing speakers, and there's been so many, who have told their story on the stage of AFRL Inspire. And I know one of the talks that we revisited is a personal friend of mine, Dr. Wendy Goodson, and I was so enthralled with her talk, seeing it live on stage. And watching it again, it's every bit as captivating now as it was then, especially in light of our current situation with the pandemic. So I think that what Inspire means to me is it puts the amazing, incredible science that our researchers are doing here at AFRL, it puts it into an accessible form for the common person, and I think it reaches an extremely broad audience. And for lack of a better word, it inspires us all. It motivates us. It makes us want to look around and see what others are doing, and reach out and collaborate with them, and find new partnerships, and hopefully inspire kids that are out there watching this, and grows even our STEM pipeline. So I think AFRL Inspire means quite a bit internally for our workforce, but I think it means just as much externally to a public audience.
So touching on that, you kind of hit that at the end. Why do you think Inspire is so important to the S&T community, and even people who may not be as versed in science and technology?
I think for the S&T community, when I talk to researchers, they say that sometimes they just don't have the time or the bandwidth, so to speak, to know all the other research that's going out there, even within their organization of 10,000 folks, that inspires a time for them to pause for a moment and sometimes get to hear about work of which they were unfamiliar. It gives them that opportunity to maybe even collaborate afterwards, find out, wow, that's someone working in space and I'm working something that doesn't seem obviously related, but yet later they can connect with one another. I think that happens quite a bit for internally for our folks. But again, like I said, I think our audience hopefully today will be much broader than just our internal folks. And I hope that there'll be people in universities and younger students who are motivated and interested to go and maybe go to our website and do a search of, what student programs are out there. And I know, Kenneth, you can probably quote that website for me, and I'm gonna let you do that now. I think it's AFResearchLab.com.
That is correct. Yeah, it's AFResearchLab.com. We actually did just revamp our careers section. So if you go there, we have a drop-down menu at the top. You can find work with us in careers, opportunities for students, people working in faculty and academia and beyond. So it's very easy to work with us via the website.
Awesome.
And I'm glad you brought that up. So what advice would you have for students right now? I know people in the pandemic, it's been difficult to even try to defend thesis, for instance, or trying to reach out for classes, or trying to connect with professors. So people at a time like this that need something like Inspire, what would you tell them?
I think that, so Kenneth, my past life, I was a high school biology teacher. So I feel a great connection with students. I myself just graduated from a doctoral program. So I think that what I say to students is always remain hopeful, always remain motivated. As cliche as it sounds, you are our future, and we need to foster and grow our wonderful talent that's found right here in the United States. And I want to I want to motivate students to realize their own natural talents. And I want them out there competing for our science doctoral programs, and I want them filling those seats. So right now it seems a little bleak. I have a senior who is wondering whether or not he'll be going to campus in the fall, but life will go on. Right now we have to do things like this and connect virtually. So I want to encourage students to continue to do that, and hopefully seek out these types of opportunities to continue to feed their desire to learn, know more, and cultivate themselves. So I'm hoping that today is just another way to reach kids and know that you're our future and we're counting on you.
And to help students if they want to learn more, are there any past Inspire talks you drive them to?
Oh, wow, Kenneth, that's a hard question because there's so many great talks. If I'm thinking back to some of the presentations, scientific ones that really caught my eye, in the past there was a great one. I'm not exactly sure of the year, but it was all about space junk. And it was such an interesting talk. And that is definitely a problem that we still face today that is an increasing problem. So I would point them in that direction. You guys might be able to help me with the name of that speaker and the date. Do either of you remember his name?
Yeah, it's talk from Dr. Jha in 2015.
Okay, thank you. And then, you know, since my memory is a little bit fuzzy, I remember a lot of last year's talks. Specifically, there was Brennan Taylor, a young airman who I loved his talk. It was about telling your story. And I think I just related to it, again, around the fact that that's where my research and passion lies. But Brennan gave such a captivating talk. And it was around really being able to make science accessible. So that one comes to mind. Dr. Miracle gave a really good talk last year as well. And now I'm going to be hard-pressed to give the title of his talk. But I would point the students to any one of those, you know, going to the YouTube station and just kind of looking. I do a little scan for what interests you. Hey, Michelle and Kenneth, there's one last thing before I let you guys go. I just really quickly want to give a sincere thank you to your team. So Michelle, Kenneth, and Keith, who's in the editing room, you guys did such an amazing job stepping up for us here in these very unusual conditions to put together such a great Facebook Live event today. And I want to thank you guys for your effort. We called an audible. You guys rose to the occasion, and genuinely, we really appreciate it. And I think everybody watching out there would say the same. Thanks, guys.
Dr. Marshall, thank you for joining us today. We're excited to hear the postponed 2020 Inspire talks at a later date. The speakers worked hard at bringing their stories surrounding space propulsion, human-machine communication, and beyond.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today. If you'd like to hear more inspiring AFRL talks, check out our YouTube channel and scroll to the AFRL Inspire playlist. And in the meantime, like Dr. Starr encouraged us to do, wash your hands, wash your hands. We'll see you next time.